the quick DTS presentation. So my name is Osher Adensky. I'm the managing director of Deep Tech Showcase. And essentially, our goal is to bring more deep tech to market. And the reason for this is there's a lot of technologies out there and available that make a lot of sense and have a lot of different use cases. But to have those technologies really cross the finish line, or beat what they need to do, it's difficult and it requires a lot of help. And it takes an ecosystem, right? That's what we say very cheesily. So our goal essentially is to connect startups with investors, federal government, and corporations, with the goal of furthering deep tech as a whole. We host monthly events over Zoom. Aside from these webinars, our next event is going to be the Energy Showcase, which is very appropriate for this webinar and the folks on this webinar. And where it is that 15 companies that are developing innovative technologies are able to present what they're doing and where they're going to be going, and hopefully connect with the right people from there. In addition to that, we help with deal flow. If anyone wants to learn more about it or talk further, we're happy to. And without further ado, I give the floor over to Mitch Gold. Mitch is the Director of Business Development for Eagle Point Funding. Mitch, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Osher and Alex. Great to be here with everybody today. Just wanted to share just quick 3 slides with you about what we do here at Eagle Point as a grant consultant agency. So the first things first, what we do here is our keys to winning federal funding. So what that really means is that we do 2 main things here at Eagle Point. The first one is really identification and navigation. So what that means is having our grant consultants, knowing the system, go out with your help to understand the tech and find all of the relevant opportunities for your technology and your company, the ones you have thought of, and more importantly, the ones you may not have thought of. The second part of what we do here is then to help with the grant consulting, grant writing, and project management to actually be able to help you fill in these templates and tell your tech in the story in the way that the government wants to hear that. So what are your major criteria to win? Really, that means that you have innovative tech, your technology is something new or pushing the bounds of what already exists, and that your R&D team has a proven track record of success, not people that have been doing this for 1 year or 2, but have a real proven track record of success. So what we really try to do with you here when you partner with us is that, as I mentioned, we want to get you in the most amount of submissions across all of the relevant agencies in the government. And so what we will do then is work on a submission for average 4 to 6 weeks, as you see. But our goal is to get you to somewhere around 10 submissions. There's no limit. We try to get your highest rate of success possible by submitting you to all of these agencies. So that is a little high overview of what we do here at Eagle Point, and would love to speak to anyone at any time about that. But thank you so much, Osher, for the time.
Absolutely. All right. And now, without further ado, I introduce our main speaker, who we're going to be asking our questions to, Alexander Rozenfeld. He is the managing director and founder at Climate Impact Capital. And how this is going to work, just so that everyone in the audience knows, is that right now, Mitch is going to ask a few questions that we think would cover a lot of ground for many of us. So it's, more of the straightforward, popular questions, and he's going to ask them. But feel free to leave questions in the Q&A or the chat, but I prefer the Q&A, if able to, where we can get to them throughout. So if you have a question or something comes up that you think could be interesting, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to all of them that we can. So Mitch is going to start with, some of probably the more, questions that are on everyone's mind more so. And then if you have a question in addition, feel free to leave it and we'll try to get to them. So Mitch, go right ahead.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much again. And thank you, Alex, for being here. First things first, I really was just wondering if you could tell us a little more about yourself and your company and really what makes you different than the other VCs in this sector.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Asher, for having me. So I formed Climate Impact Capital 7 years ago. My background before then was a little bit over 20 years in corporate R&D, venture capital, angel capital, projects, first of a kind, large projects in other areas of energy and power. And what I saw was that, there were a number of value of deaths, as the term is coined, that people had in terms of energy. And one of the principal ones that I was always working on was the first value of death of how do you get the companies to get it to a product that's commercially viable. And we saw just multiple challenges around that from a corporate perspective of bringing in, how do you bring in new technology? How do you provide value add as a corporate? And then I was also a fund-to-fund manager at Shell as well, and saw a lot of challenges interestingly for general partner fund strategies for creating value. So they were, always looking to get money, but were never really clear as to why they were the smart money and were going to deliver value. And really kind of it boils down to, I think, how is value defined? And when you're a corporate investor, or, if you prefer to be termed, if you're on the non-corporate side, an impact investor, you're looking for the same thing, actually. You're looking for a product or a service that is actualized, which is standardized, which you can buy in bulk, which integrates with your current products and offerings and your legacy systems, that can grow with you, and that has warranty and support, right? In the end, you don't care as much as to, is there an exit versus is there a product that makes me value? So if you, as a corporate, if I can use a product and make 100x the value on the revenue side, do I care? Did I get a 5x? No. Same thing, I think, on an impact investor. If you can do a lot of great things, do I care if I have a 2x exit or a 5x exit? No. I want to really do great things. And that was what was missing in the market. And CIC came in to change that.
That's great that you're able to facilitate that for other people. So what does that process look like in terms of climate impact capital? When you say you're looking for a specific company with value, is there anything specific that you're looking at when you say that, or you're just talking about impact in general?
No, we have a pretty specific process. So we identify the areas of that climate change and energy transition is this going to disrupt our economy. So if you think about it, things that all of us experience is like these massive weather events, right? Whether you had a unholy freeze that took down the power system for a week, right? Or you have a drought that basically lowered your reservoirs or your dams and you no longer have hydropower, right? Or the combination of a drought and a freeze killed all the crops. These are things that are impacting large corporations and people on an everyday basis. So we look at these events, we look at where technology is going and say, what company is missing that has a suite of products and services that's going to address it? Because we don't really see that there's often a single silver bullet that's going to make it happen. So we kind of look for those areas, and then we approach large corporate partners saying, we see that your business is going to be impacted by this area. Let's choose an area where you can create an adjacent business or a white space business, which is further off, that will address these risks to your corporate bottom line, to your corporate longevity, and for your customers. And then what we do is we go out and source 6 to 8 companies that are in the venture stage, that are raising money, but have synergies in their products and services. And then we do due diligence on the whole portfolio. We look specifically for ways that we can integrate these technologies and services. So from a corporate perspective, they get this platform of 6 to 8 pieces that work together synergistically. And then when they try to bring it in-house, there's just one line of interest to get in-house, because we do all the integration on the API side, on the technology stack, on the business side, on the outside in our special purpose vehicles.
That's great. It sounds like a very streamlined process that you're able to take these companies through with investors and themselves. Just a little bit on the reporting side in terms of climate companies. I know ESG, environmental and social governances, tend to be a pretty big thing now, except with companies buying up carbon credits and the different ways they're looking at that now. Do you have an opinion on where ESGs are headed, or where they are now and where they're heading in the future?
Yeah, I think ESG as a term is going away. It's like, who talks about, gap accounting as something that you care about, right? It's a given that you have gap accounting, by your startup or by your large company to let alone say startups. And so I think ESG is pretty much table stakes, right? For any major company, except there's a few who are, actively just want to buy the old and dirty assets, and there's not that many of those left. So we're really seeing is a gradual movement to looking at the actual specific impact metrics. And a lot of that is looking for corporates on their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. That's becoming fairly standard. For the audience members who aren't familiar, scope 1 emissions are the greenhouse gas emissions that are made within the property line of a corporate's business. Scope 2 emissions are things like power and fuel that you bring and use, but most of the emissions are outside of that. And scope 3 emissions are the emissions of your products, being if you're a oil and gas company, like 90% of your emissions are when your natural gas or gasoline is burned by a consumer. And so those are the 3 areas that they're focusing on. And they're certainly looking for the technologies that allow them to lower those metrics over time.
Great, that makes sense. So one question I had in terms of startups that are moving forward now, as you mentioned, they're looking at different metrics. Is it important at all for these companies to be looking at ESG, or would you say it's important to look at the other metrics that you spoke about and lowering those types of emissions?
Well, so we focus mostly on climate change emissions. So we look at CO2 and methane as the principal ones that we look for. And so we're mostly energy focused. So we work with petrochemical companies, oil and gas companies, power companies. And that's the big metric that almost all of them are measured on when it comes to shareholders. And so that's our main focus. Certainly there's other important ones that are up and coming, specifically water use and water intensity, that is becoming more and more important, and we keep an eye out on that as well.
Great, that's awesome. Speaking of things that you guys are keeping an eye on now and in the world, I know that not to speak politically in any way, but the war in Ukraine, we see a lot of problems with energy grids and energy and climate in places of war or disaster more and more nowadays. What does that mean for the energy sector in general, or do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it's certainly, there's a number of, I think we're seeing short and long-term drivers coming out of that. I think, as I know, Europe has certainly finally gotten its wake-up call around single source for any type of energy to one type of player. So I think long-term, I think Europe now much more clearly sees the need for diversification of energy supplies. Now, the question is going to be whether the short-term move to bring on back some of the coal plants, bring on back more natural gas. Certainly, they're trying to bring more LNG import terminals into the country. Those are all potentially long-term assets that are going to lock themselves into. That is going to preclude a faster move to newer energy technologies. So that's the kind of the worrying part about what's going. That is like there's kind of a step back or a step sideways that they're taking in order to keep literally the lights on. But I think longer term, there's going to be a lot of strong support for deep natural gas decarbonization in Europe, both on the industrial side as well as on the residential side. And I think even more strongly, perhaps on the residential side, as kind of someone kind of gave me, it's not a really nice joke, but at the point is like no one really cares if like a factory closes itself down for a couple of days because there's not enough natural gas going around. But people do care about stories about grandmas freezing to death in their apartment because they can afford the natural gas. So I think from that perspective, there's going to be a lot of stronger push and a lot of opportunities for technologies around building retrofits and moving away from natural gas for that. And that's going to bring on board a lot of new technologies into Europe from that perspective, which I think is a good.
Great. Yeah, that makes sense, as that's a lot of where this is occurring now. Do you see any of that change or long-term versus short-term process happening in the US as well, or do you see this mostly being focused on the EU?
Well, certainly there's a lot of focus on natural gas decarbonization in the US, this particularly the California markets. And so if the laws haven't changed recently, as they do in California, is that there's been a lot of legislation, some of it passed, some of it maybe still in progress, around new homes not being tied into natural gas, specifically for heating, water heating and home heating, as well as for homes being pre-built in order to take solar energy. So I think, California, I have to double check, but I'm pretty certain the market was bigger than Ukraine's going in before the war. And so I think that's really driving a lot of standards, as California drove a lot of the standards for early EV and EV technologies. And so I think that's going to continue. And of course, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, there's a mass amounts of opportunity that's going to be coming out from that.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that. That's actually something I was going to speak or ask about next. I know we have the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that's coming out or out. That's speaking about tax incentives for companies being more environmentally friendly. How is that playing out currently, and how do you see that going in terms of U.S. companies?
Well, I'm very hopeful it'll play out well. I think it's early to tell. The challenge always is when you have these big government programs, is that the opportunity for waste and malfeasance is very high. But there's a lot of it is tied to tax credits, which makes it kind of a little bit on the unlimited side until it gets kicked in, because it's not a budget appropriation. It hits on the tax side. And there's certainly a lot of interesting tax credits out there. One of the ones that we see that's driving projects right now is the huge hydrogen tax credit that allows green hydrogen and blue hydrogen also to a large extent to be competitive with traditional technology. So in the hydrogen space, it's typically made from natural gas through a process called steam methane reforming. So you take natural gas, you burn some of it, you heat up a process with steam, and then you take more natural gas and you crack it into CO2 and into hydrogen. And you produce a lot, and that CO2 basically goes up into the air. So right now there's a lot of money to do hydrogen through electrolysis and CO2 capture, which basically makes these new technologies cost basis on par, and depending on the natural gas price for the month, sometimes even cheaper than traditional technology. So we're seeing a big rush of project money from large corporates into that space, and a lot of interest in new technologies. So that's a big one. There's continuing and long subsidies for solar energy, especially for minority, historically underrepresented communities and areas that were also historically, there were a lot of highly environmentally impactful, poor impact projects, but in kind of these energy zones. When you think about coal projects, petrochemical process projects, so there's money, very large subsidies to put in cleaner technologies into those areas, which I think is good, because that brings kind of cost reductions as well as environmental benefits to some of the most impacted elements of society. So a lot of pieces there as well on that side, and then a lot of certainly further money through the Infrastructure Act that ties into here as well into EV charging. So I think you can see those elements of infrastructure, hydrogen, renewable energy, both on the kind of residential aspect as well as on utility scale and mobility, all coming together around that. Now, the test will be when the first companies start asking to get those credits. Are they going to go through easily or not? Because there are certain hurdles that you need to meet in order to get those credits. Principally, and this is kind of a interesting feature that most people aren't familiar with, is that to get a lot of these credits, they put in this hidden jobs bill into the IRA. And what it is saying that you need to have a certain percentage of apprentices in your solar work, in your hydrogen work, and these other projects while you're building them. And I think the goal was that we just don't have enough trade skills right now in the US. And they want to foster these companies to bring in young people right out of high school, or people who are traditionally maybe from coal jobs or oil jobs into the space. And to get a lot of these tax credits, you need to have up to 10% of your workforce as apprentices working on any projects. And of course, you can't stay an apprentice forever, right? You have to become apprentice, you be journeyman, or you get a full-time job. So it's really this constant jobs program to bring in new people into the industry, because without a large boost in the base of, think of it as, people out there who are digging trenches, putting in solar pylons, putting solar on those pylons, building out manufacturing. We're not going to be able to reach these goals. And even right now, the goals that the US has, we can't reach them because we don't have enough people to build these things, let alone forget the manufacturing aspects of it.
Yeah, that's great that they have that in there, just because trade is percentage wise on the low, so it's good they're being able to do that. My question, it sounds like a pretty positive thing to have a nice rotation of people. Have you seen anything about making it a little harder for these companies to bring on 10% apprentices in terms of a strict workforce, or do you think it is a positive thing for these companies and not a tough hurdle to get past?
I don't think it's a tough hurdle to find people coming out of high school that want to have a well-paying job. And I think it's a tough hurdle if we need to allow more people into the country that can meet those criteria. So I think it's very doable. These credits are very, very generous. So it's the question of bringing on board for a significant project, let's say even a project 500 people, bring on board 50 junior people at a junior pay grade, or pay them even higher to be able to get a 30 or 40% tax credit. I think the companies are not going to have a struggle to do that when you balance the two against each other.
Amazing. That's great to see. I know you mentioned in terms of the IRA, whether it was solar, renewables, hydrogen, gas, have you seen a main trend in the climate tech space today?
Well, certainly right now, hydrogen is hot again. It's kind of like, hydrogen gets hot every 20 years. Hopefully it actually kind of stays hot this time around. So, the Department of Energy, probably about a year ago, put out a proposal to do a number of hydrogen hubs around the United States that they would provide $500 million for each hub up to 500 with an equal industry matching. There's, I think, over about, close to 30 proposals for hubs around the United States. We have 4 of them in Texas. So I think this approach to, hydrogen infrastructure, that's new, and I think that's very positive. And then you're seeing a lot of newer technologies coming into that hydrogen space. So I think that's really kind of new and different from the last couple of years, where you had this technologies in hydrogen, but it wasn't as much of an interest. And now you have this on top of it, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to be even driving more technology. So I think that's probably one of the biggest trends that's different than what you may have seen in the last couple of years, and that you'll be able to fairly easily see as headlines without being really kind of getting into depth into any kind of one specific area that you need to be an expert in.
Awesome. That's great. To touch on the investment side a little bit, because I know you're saying that's on the scientific side, what they're trying really to push. Do you see three top areas of interest on the investment side for startups that you're excited about that you see in the current space?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of them. I'll just touch on the areas that I find exciting. In the last, I guess when I say like 5-6 years, maybe going back to as far as 7, there's been, I think, a bit of a renaissance in the geothermal space, where, for decades, geothermal was relegated to what you kind of call hot rocks, or you have to be in Iceland or near a volcanic region in order to do that. So really niche projects. And a lot of people have left oil and gas and are applying the techniques that were used in hydraulic fracking, both drilling, subsurface reservoir analysis, hydraulic fracturing, subsurface heat transfer. And so there's a number of startups in the space that want to use those technologies for geothermal. And I think that's very exciting. It's a transfer of skills from one area that's done really well in reducing cost and time by an order of magnitude. That's why we've had the shale gas revolution in the US, and US became a net gas exporter, principally even right now to Europe, where we didn't export any gas at all 15 years ago, outside, Mexico and Canada, of course. And so that, I think, is quite exciting. And what I particularly like about geothermal is that you can get quite a bit of energy with a very small footprint. So you drill a well, and then the drilling rig goes away. Everything else is, you can, cap it at 10-15 feet. It's below a fence line. And, amazingly, even in places like Hawaii doesn't like to have wind turbines offshore. Other places, even in Texas, I've heard people like, we don't want to see solar panel on the roof. And even if you want those things, you need to bring the power to where industry is. And if you're in a heavily industrialized place, where are you going to find 100 acres to put solar? Where are you going to find places to put the wind turbines? Versus geothermal, especially the medium and low temperature stuff, you can put anywhere. And that, I think, could lead to a lot of decarbonization. So anyway, so that's what we're super excited about that. And the other area that we're excited about, and we've done about 4 deals as climate impact capital in the space, is Agtech. If you look at kind of food waste in the United States, I think I read somewhere that, like, if food waste, we took the CO2 impact of that, it'd be like the 7th biggest country in the world, just the amount of food we throw away in the United States. It's amazing. And if you look at, where you can be impactful on a global level, the food supply chain is among the top 10 areas that you can be impactful globally. It's actually, I think, on par, maybe even better than a lot of the renewable energy technologies. And so we're very excited about technologies that allow the supply chain to be much better. So there's less food being wasted along the way to fungus, to heat, to rot, and to keep it fresh through the supply chain. And that's first great for the environment, but also it's a technology that's a kind of a double or triple bottom line, because you don't have to price it on being this is great for the environment, it's impactful. Because if you're a farmer and you're being paid on the quality of the crop as it's delivered, right, you're at risk of it being stuck in shipment. So you may not even realize the full price of your crop, especially if things get stuck. And same if you're a large supplier like a grocery store, once you paid for it, if you have to throw away a lot of the food, that hits your bottom line as well. And it kind of goes on forth, like, in anyone's, kitchen, if everyone went out, opened their refrigerator or looking at your garbage can, you'll see it, like, we're always throwing something away. So that supply chain, I think, is very exciting. We've done a number of things. We did a technology that does quantum dots, as an example, that allows people who grow any crop in a greenhouse to tune the frequency of light to the growing cycle, so you can grow more. We've done technologies that allow you to disinfect food and product lines so that it doesn't go bad, using technologies around disinfecting. We've also invested in technologies that keep food from ripening across the course of shipping, and that keeps it from spoilage. So I think that's super incredible, and all of us should feel good about wasting less food.
I would say we should all be excited for cleaner beaches and fresher food. That's all good things we can be excited for. In terms of the climate tech space in general, on the startup side and the investor side, in terms of the approach that they should take, whether that be partners or alliances, how do you think that they should best approach this space in general?
Yeah, I think climate tech and energy tech is just, is so complex. A lot of this technology and business takes a long time to get through trials. There's often complexity in integrating it with the legacy technologies. It's not like an app you just, when was the last time you had an app that failed, when you load it onto your phone. But there's lots of failures when you try to integrate into a system that was programmed 30, 40 years ago. If it's in a refinery or something that's really designed for one purpose, and you're trying to get it to do something different. So when there's this level of complexity, when you have a lot of incumbency and a lot of momentum for doing things like they've always been done, and certainly it's also an industry that safety is very important, right? You don't want things to blow up, you don't want to have a hazardous spill, you don't want people to get hurt. And so their safety is built in for many reasons. So kind of when you take all these things together, it makes it very difficult for any one startup to survive long enough through the multiple valleys of death of, finding a technology, proving it out, then getting to this, first pilots, getting the results that are needed, and then getting to these first orders. So, and this kind of goes back to the, why we look at this from a portfolio perspective. And so whether you're part of a portfolio of companies, with someone like us, or you're just out there thinking, how do I best get my product into the market? We really do tell and promote this idea that you should look for as many partners and collaborations as you can. You shouldn't be kind of hugging your technology and your idea to your chest. You should say, it's like, I have a great software, in the energy space for optimizing home energy use. Well, you do, then your first thing you should be doing is going and talking to all the thermostat companies. You should be partnering with Nest. You should be partnering with the Siemens. You should be partnering with everyone who has a thermostat company. You should be partnering with anyone else who has another product that would latch onto yours. And I think the more partnerships you have with more pieces of equipment, the more likely you are to succeed, because first you're helping other people succeed with their products because you're creating this ecosystem, and you're providing a level of choice to consumers as to where they want to start from, whether it's a consumer being a residential or a commercial customer or industrial customer. And I think we don't have as much of that. I think there's often this very strong Silicon Valley mentality of, I'm going to do it on my own and I'm going to become a unicorn, versus let's find something we can do together, create a solid product, and exit at first or second base, with a 3-4x return, and come back and do it again, do it a couple of times. And I think that's missing. And you even see this a lot, even at the incubator and accelerator level. You think that these different incubators, accelerators around the country or collaborate. They don't. They always try to kind of get company through their program. There's very little sharing, and I think that's problematic. What's interesting though is that at least in my experience, a lot of the corporate investors are not averse to this cooperation. And you'll often see, for interesting startups, you'll see 4 or 5, or more corporate investors around the table investing, and working together at the board level, because in the space of energy transition and climate change, they really see it, whether they often admit it or not, as a significant problem to their continued existence and the rights to operate, especially if they're public companies. So they're quite keen to bring their money together to the table. And And I think startups and entrepreneurs should be equally keen to, to bring on board partnerships into their fundraising and to bring on board a diversity of smart corporate money onto their boards.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I agree. Sharing is caring. So it's good that you're open to that idea in this space as well, that it's better to partner with more people than not. In regards to that process, whether you're a startup or investor, what is the biggest mistake you see in pursuing climate applications?
Yeah, I think there's often a underestimation of the time it takes to get to first customers, the time it takes to get to 10th customer. And I don't know, maybe, this is endemic in other places, but, there's, everyone's probably, or most people have heard of the infamous J curve, right? Startup year 1, 2, 3, it's like, 5-10% growth, 15, and then all of a sudden it like skyrockets through the roof. So, with 5x growth each year. And I think that this mentality that there's a J curve somewhere for you, I think that's one of the biggest ones. It's really linear growth, maybe ramping up a little bit, but this longer timelines, the amount of burn rate that you need to go through, the complexity of customers where you try to have a standard product, but yet each customer has a unique problem, and you end up having to put in a lot more back office and support systems to keep your customers happy in the early days while you kind of come on with a kind of multiple set of project solutions. All of these things just lead to a harder and harder time to forecast when you're going to get to free cash flow, and then how are you going to scale. And I've yet to kind of see a company that's done really well on being able to forecast 18, 24 months ahead, let alone, 3-4 years ahead, just because they always kind of think that everything is just so much easier and don't understand, what should be kind of known unknowns or even known knowns for them around the complexity of doing business within the utility space or in the energy space.
Great. And in terms of looking to the future, in terms of steady progress, steady growth, is there anything, do you have an opinion on what we will see in terms of climate innovation in those next 5 years?
Yeah, so I'm really hopeful that we're going to be seeing more of these integrated hub concepts as these projects go forward, whether it's the CO2 hubs or the hydrogen hubs. This idea of circular economy, which has been around in Europe for a long time, particularly in the Scandinavian and Northern European countries, where you cite multiple different factories together. So there's kind of the idea there is no waste, it's just a product going into a stream. We're beginning to see some of that as well. I've seen some projects that kind of combine some biofuel elements with traditional elements being kind of planned in the Gulf Coast. So I think this concept of us moving into more of a circular manufacturing system will hopefully begin taking hold with multiple pilots of scale. So kind of pilots of scale being $500 billion pilots in this sector. I think that would be truly kind of exciting and transformational across the spaces around, especially the downstream economies of that. I think that's going to be interesting to watch. I talked about geothermal. I think this next 5 years is going to be the sink or swim moment to know if that's going to happen. Okay? They've been around. They've been trying to do pilots. Some of them are kind of been pilots. If this technology is going to work, we will see it working within this 5-year space. It's not going to be like hydrogen. Well, come back in 20 years, see that it's going to work or not. All the pieces are there. It's just a question of can they implement it, and then it's going to be a question of in 5 years, 5 to 10. How quickly they can reduce the costs. I think those are going to be pieces there. Less clear, but certainly we're seeing, continued innovation in this space is in material sciences. There's just a lot of interesting things going on the material side. And of course, we've been doing material science for a long time. There's nothing new in that. But I think we continue to see a strong acceleration in the use of AI, machine learning, computer power to be able to identify new materials. So kind of the analog of what's going on in the biological spaces of coming up with new proteins and peptides and drugs through a computer process rather than this testing process. The analogous view on the side for energy. So where would that kind of be? That would be in the materials around CO2 capture is an interesting place. CO2 capture, catalysis, I think is quite interesting as well. Better ways of catalysis that allows you to take CO2 to chemicals, but also to reduce the energy costs around there. I think it's quite interesting on the electrochemistry side for, again, on the material side. And of course, there's continued and a lot of interest and a lot of money continues to flow into advanced battery solutions. And so how do you move away from lithium? How do you make lithium less flammable, or going to solutions that are non-lithium based? Especially right now with a strong push again from the IRA around sourcing materials here in North America. I think that will again push towards, well, first more lithium sources, but also looking at materials that we can more easily source that are non-lithium chemistries. And I think that will be exciting to watch and follow. And certainly the material chemistry companies have done pretty well in the last 5 years in terms of going to IPOs and going into the market. So I think that's a space certainly that we'll be watching to see for breakthroughs.
Thank you. It sounds like the next 5 years will have a lot of opportunities for a lot of various subfields in the climate tech space. So I guess one of the most important questions that I kind of ask while we talk about the future is, where can investors be smarter about these opportunities looking to the future?
No, I think it's certainly an important question. And I think it just depends on, what kind of investor you are. Certainly corporate investors, I think they need to think about integration first, because there are values on the strategic side. If you're a kind of a philanthropic investor or an impact investor, you might want to give money through like your donor advised funds, like we do as well. Then I think the question becomes, is your investment that you're doing for an impact purpose, and whether that could be in energy, that could be in women's issues, that could be environmental justice, it could be social justice. I think the question is, are you thinking through that investment in a system-based way? And the way I kind of talk about it from the from a traditional side, everyone's probably heard this, this little phrase like, if you're trying to help a impoverished community, don't give them a fish, teach them how to fish, give them a fishing pole, right? I think right now we need to think through the next step. Like, it doesn't help, as I say, to give someone a fishing pole if they're in Nicaragua, if we think the reefs are collapsing due to climate change, right? You're thinking maybe for the, maybe through the next generation, maybe even not. And then it's not sustainable again. And I think we've often propped up non-sustainable systems with money because it feels good to help someone in the near term, but we're not solving the problem for them in their old age or for their kids or their grandkids. And I think that's, I think a keen lesson for anyone who's thinking about on the impact side of things. And if you're let's say an angel investor or a VC investor, I would also then kind of point to this need for having, feet on the ground where you're investing into. So, having people who are available to kind of work with the companies, even though we're in a virtual environment, but having kind of even those virtual feet on the ground where you can be helpful. We just see so many board members and kind of folks that are invested, they're just putting their money to work and then they just go away. I say the best investment is like, that when you're asked like, was that piece of art a good investment? Well, the answer from the art dealers are, do you enjoy that piece of art, right? And if you take that kind of mindset to your investment practices, like, do you enjoy working with that CEO and that board? Can you provide value to them? Do you understand that space? And I'd say that's where I think the good VCs focus into that. Good angel investors focus into that. You don't try to have this kind of super broad portfolio where you're the master of nothing. I think focus on the areas that you're good at doing, and that you can bring value to the people around you.
Those are great points. Be involved and understand the problem and find the right solution. So I think that's very helpful for people here. But again, I think that's all the questions I have. So thank you so much for answering all these and really being able to give me a better, and everyone else here, much better understanding of the ClimateTech space.
Okay. So did we get any tough questions?
We do have a few good ones. I'll just do this. I'm gonna get started reading these, but first one I think we're gonna take from Roy. Is there a bright line where companies should be raising as a Series A versus seed or bridge? As in, is there an area that makes the most sense, or you think should be?
Yeah, that we say, like, okay, when are you ready to raise? Well, I at the very least, we found a lot of companies who just haven't done their ABCs around, the corporate governance, right? Remember, we started the conversation of, Mitch asked about ESG, and like say, well, ESG goes along with, like, do proper accounting. So a lot of the startups don't have proper governance, so that's a big issue. So if you don't have proper governance, you should not be raising money. So that includes having the right policies in place around financial management. Do you have a board structure in place? Have you created the right allocation of equity for your employees? That's I think the basics around that. I think also we found, at least in my space, a lot of companies don't recognize who their competitors are very well. And if you haven't done a strong competitive and IP analysis of your space, this is again kind of basic venture capital kind of 101. You should not be raising. You should understand not just who your current competitors are, but who are the other startups in the space that are going to be providing competitive solutions 5 years out as you try to go into the market in that space. And we just see those basic things that are, it doesn't matter what area of investing you're into, that the startups aren't doing that. So I think that's kind of the table stakes, I think, for all the startups to have before they go in. And then I think certainly in the energy space, and I think that's probably is again, sound advice for in non-energy as well, is that, when you're going and pitching to a corporate investor, really, it's, I think the onus on the startup to understand what that corporate strategic needs are, because they're not really in there generally just for the financial investment alone. They want to get their money back. So being able to really understand their market segments very well, I think those are all the basic things there. I think that's the starting point. And if you can get all of those, then that's at least, I think, the starting point for a Series A.
Sure, absolutely. And then someone else asked, are there funding opportunities that you know of for early stage startups? As in, where would you go? I guess the question really is if you're going to start a clean tech company tomorrow, where would your first steps be other than friends and family? And where's the best places involved?
Well, certainly, U.S. government is fairly generous through the Department of Energy, the RPE program. So there's a lot of constant opportunities out there to get government grants in the space. Now, it's not easy to get them. You need basically hire a professional proposal writer to get there. But there is money available to do that. And those are considerable grants in that space. So I think you always look at those. There's also a number of incubators out there, certainly in the energy space, that provide services, including corporate incubators that don't charge for being part of the program. So I think finding opportunities to join those incubators. There's ones here in Houston that are done by oil and gas companies. There's in the West Coast, Cyclotron Road works particularly with the national labs, so you can you get access to the national labs for that. Yeah, so like corporate incubators, like Wells Fargo had IN2, IN squared. That's for companies in the built environment. Shell has a partnership with NREL. This is a kind of an NREL corporate incubator partnership there. European company ENEL, they have a number of incubators around the world. They're kind of unique is that they don't provide any equity. They provide this incubation model with the goal that they become licensees or users of the technology. I just met with a representative. They have a Boston office that works out of Greentown Labs. And Greentown Labs, you can almost say it's like a it's a fully corporate sponsored incubator. They have an office in Boston and one here that's recently opened in Houston. I'm actually after this talk going over to their office here in Houston to meet the number of startups. So I think that those are all good places to be. If you're lucky enough to be in a city that's already has that incubator, I would certainly start there, and that's a good place to kind of put your startup. But also, you asked before about collaboration. So if you have a startup that is not a complete, white space, no one has ever done it before, so go and see if you can find someone who's in that space that's already doing something, and see if there's a way to collaborate with them around that. It's, more chances than not, I'd say kind of well over 90%, they're not going to steal your idea. They're already hyper focused on what they need to do. And so if they see there's something that you have that's might help their idea separate, there's a good chance they'll get you some free advice, or may find an opportunity to raise money alongside of them. So I think, going out and finding those partnership opportunities, talking to people, and kind of, and then in the end, then you have to go and get the angel money, right? After, friends, family, and fools, then the angels fall somewhere within that.
Absolutely, yeah, and that was pretty thorough. So that's awesome. And make sure, guys, we're going to record that. We already are recording this. If anyone didn't catch any of that, don't worry. We're going to have the recording available, but make sure to take notes, because a lot of those things are fantastic resources. It looks like, there's some other questions, but most of them, I don't think they're for now. Maybe we can answer them privately if necessary. But Alex, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure having you on this talk, and I think that this is a really good resource for companies to learn and kind of understand what's out there, what's available, what makes the most sense, and how they should be positioning themselves. So we definitely appreciate it. And thank you so much, Mitch. You're fantastic as well. And with that, with 5 minutes to spare.
Yeah, and sure. And then one last thing is, just in case, for folks that don't have it, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find there, and it's alex@climateimpactcapital.com. So I think someone had wanted to reach out. So that's the best way to find me. Thank you again for the seminar. It was great talking to you, Mitch, and great as always being part of your program, Sasha.
Absolutely. So with that, without further ado, thank you for joining, and yeah, looking forward to, if anyone wants to reach out or speak, I'm gonna put my email. I'm happy to always talk with anyone, and hopefully we'll be able to help out wherever we can. But have a good rest of the day, everyone.
And Asher, if you can include my email in that would be awesome as well.
Awesome. Yeah, will do. And I'll also email it to them because we're going to close this out. All right. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.